myself if I were a civilian while other people were over there fighting. In the Army, I was classified as a playwright. They sent me to different camps where I wrote training films.
He even drew a pamphlet about how not to get venereal disease, which he's very good at.
There were only 9 men in the Army who were classified as playwrights, and I was in great company. There was William Saroyan, Carl Emley Jr., Frank Capra, and a guy named Theodore Geisel, whom you may know as Dr. Seuss.
He was evidently, so good he could always finish his work so fast that, that he'd be able to sit around in Goldbrick for a while, I guess,
After the war ended, we could all get back to normal. Everybody thought that was the last war we'd ever have. Now there'd be peace in the world.
Hello, how are you? Glad to see you.
Did you have a good day?
Yeah, how are you? You look great, but you always look great.
What would you like?
I'd like to put my bag down for a minute. I'll be right back.
Good idea.
I don't know how we ever got married.
That's the difference between you and me.
How many years?
Do you know how many years?
60.
I'll tell you, 60 years.
60 years this year.
On the 5th of
Next
this
month.
And I still don't think I've got it right.
Well, I may as well tell you the whole truth, really, and nothing but the truth. I crossed over in the old Mauritania from England during the last of the lovely wars, and I came over as a war bride. And I became a hat model. And Stan said to one of the salesmen there, "That's the girl I'm going to marry." And they said, "Not a chance, she's married already." And he said, "No, that's the girl I'm going to marry." And 6 weeks later, I was in Reno, spending his money.
I can't do it.
Come on, get up.
I'm no good. No, I won't do it. I will not. People who think I'm wonderful, I will not let. No, please don't do this to me. Just go ahead. You're real good. Should have seen her 60 years ago. Wait, this is what she hates.
You
don't do that in this. You don't do that in this.
No, you never do this. And you get like this. This is how. Now stop. There you go. Young and gay and sweet and dancing, the girl from Ipanema goes.
Everything is mutual. I love her, and she loves me loving her.
And he loves him, and I love him loving him. And that's it. There we go. Now, lucky we ought to be able to move like this at our age. Sweet Jesus.
After World War II, I got married. My wife and I, we lived in Long Island.
We lived in a wonderful, crazy apartment. He had 96th and Madison. We had this little penthouse. We had a lot of wonderful, crazy friends. And Stan was with Timely Comics then. And he was on Empire State Building. I remember how marvelous it was to go up in that elevator, and there would be Stan with these young men, sketching and doing and laughing and talking.
Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome you to the home of Marvel Comics, the Batty Bullpen.
Stan, I always wanted to visit the bullpen. What is the bullpen like?
Well, there are very few bulls.
There was an extensive bullpen. Coming and going in that bullpen were some of the giants of the industry. And Stan had them at his disposal.
We turn out about one complete comic magazine every working day.
When I would describe the kind of drawings I want, if somebody was recoiling in horror at some scene and the artist would draw like that, I'd say, that's okay, but how about like that?
He would jump on the couch. He would leap across. He would do Aunt May's voice.
He would jump up on the desk, practically, to act out how he wanted the heroes to do it. And that was a major feat, to get up on that desk with all that junk on it.
He was a believer in the silent film approach to storytelling. Don't do anything mildly. If somebody's going to pound on a desk, you know, you don't go, no, you go, you smash. That's the way he used to do. So he would animate everything he wanted to do. He'd say, have Dr. do this, you know, jumping from and leap, and he'd leap over the couch. There were stories that before I was doing sessions with Stan, that people down the hall, they would see Stan doing these gyrations in his doorway. One time, he's doing the old comic stick where somebody's strangling you. He was strangling himself and pulls himself back in, and everybody comes running down. They thought somebody was attacking Stan in his office. But he was very animated.
You know, it's a funny thing. Some people somewhere think that I wrote and drew. They think that the strips were just mine, but they would have been nothing if not for the artists that I worked with. I just put the words in the people's mouth, and I may have come up with the original idea, but after that, it was a partnership.
Stan allowed the artists to be themselves, and that, I think, was the key.
If you take a look at credits on comic books back in the 1950s, good luck. There were rarely any credits. You didn't know who the writer was. You didn't know who the artist was. Stan made sure that everybody got a credit, and he started building personality around these people.
I'm suddenly Jazzy John.
Gentleman Gene Colan.
Jolton Joe.
Darling Dick Ayers.
Rassley Roy Thomas. Jack Kirby became Jolly Jack Kirby.
Now you're part of the bullpen. You were somebody now.
I wanted our readers to feel they're part of a group, an inner circle, and we're all having a lot of fun that the rest of the world doesn't know about. So I wanted to form a club. I gave it a silly name, the MMMS, the Merry Marvel Marching Society.
You belong, you belong, you belong, you belong to the Merry Marvel March.
Okay, out there in Marveland, face front, this is Stan Lee speaking. You've probably never heard a record like this before because no one would be nutty enough to make one with a bunch of offbeat artists, so anything is liable to happen.
Hey, who made you a disc jockey, Lee?
Well, Jolly Jack Kirby, say a few words to the fans, Jackson.
Okay, a few words.
Look, pal, I'll take care of the humor around here.
You've been using the same gags over and over for years.
Hey, what's all that commotion out there, Sol?
Why, it's Shy Steve Ditko. He heard you're making a record, and he's got mic fright. Whoops, there he goes.
Out the window again? You know, I'm beginning to think he is Spider-Man.
You mean he isn't?
Enough said. Now, let's all get back to work in the bullpen, and as for you, marvelous Merry Marchers, welcome. In the gay, halcyon early days, Jack Kirby developed most of the Marvel heroes with me.
Jack drew like a movie director. He couldn't draw anything dull.
In a very short span of about 5 or 6 years, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created more successful characters than any person or two people together have ever created in the history of comics.
I always marveled at the fact that Jack was able to design so many varied characters and yet make each one totally different than the other. Jack would just put his pencil down and start drawing. He drew with such certainty. He knew just where every line was going to go. There was no hesitation, and it worked out perfectly. It was incredible.
I feel that story first. I know those people first. When I put them down, they've already lived. And I put them down as I'd like them to live on those pages.
I had worked with Jack so much. We did those monster stories, we did westerns, we did war, we did everything. I would give them the plot. I told them what I wanted the story to be.
I used to hear them plotting stories, but I don't remember them ever agreeing on anything. Jack had his own idea. He went home and did his version. And Stan, when he got the pages, said, gee, Jack didn't remember anything we talked about. Jack did one version, Stan made it something else. And that's why there's a disagreement between Jack Kirby and Stan Lee as to whose story they were.
We used to have disagreements. I never thought it got him angry. I love fighting with people. Maybe it bothered him when I always said you're wrong. I don't know.
A lot of reporters always thought, oh, Stan created everything, was they come into Stan's office and Stan would sit there and he's so charming and wonderful. You just love the guy.
Somebody wanted to interview me for the Herald Tribune magazine section. And I said, but look, if you're going to interview me, I really think you should interview Jack Kirby at the same time, because he works on it with me. He came up to the office and he interviewed us. Jack told me that he was going to stay up late Saturday night with his wife, and they were going to go to the newsstand so they'd get it right away. The first 5 columns were all about me and how wonderful I was. In the 6th column, he started talking about Jack in a very unflattering way. I got a call from Roz, Jack's wife, and I hadn't seen the article. I thought she was calling me to say how great it was, how excited they were, and she was in tears. She said, how could this have happened? It was the most horrible thing, really.
Jack quit, and I really suspect it might have been as simple as the fact that he got tired of having the credits read by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby all the time, and he may have wanted to strike out on his own.
As far as I'm concerned, there's no controversy. I mean, he was the greatest partner a guy could have.
Eventually, Jack contacted me, and he wanted to come back again, which made me happy.
Do you think that there is any danger in taking young people and showing them figures and fantastic apparitions like some of your superheroes, Captain America, Hulk, and so forth?
No more danger than reading fairy tales or poetry or the Bible.
It is my opinion, without any reasonable doubt and without any reservation, that comic books are an important contributing factor in many cases of juvenile delinquency.
Dr. Wertham was the leading opponent of comics and the most vocal one. At the time when he was having his big harangue against comics, people were very concerned about violence and about sex and about, I guess, anything that Dr. Wertham wanted to mention.
He interviewed 100 juvenile delinquents. They all said that at one time or another they read comic books. Therefore, Dr. Wertham concluded, comic books cause juvenile delinquency.
When I was a boy and played with the gang, we did a lot of things. We roasted potatoes, went on expeditions, we tipped over garbage cans now and then, we wrote nasty remarks about the teacher on the sidewalk. But we never spent an afternoon sitting around like this, reading. They're reading stories devoted to adultery, to sexual perversion, to horror, to the most despicable of crimes.
Senators were merciless. They would say, you're in it for the money? Of course you're in it for the money. We're not, and is it worth the money if you're going to distort youngsters' aspect of life?
One of my favorite accusations that Dr. Wertham made was that comic books cause asthma because children were staying indoors to read them instead of playing in the fresh air.
The fact that he was a psychiatrist, this impressed parents, and they began to think, golly, what's going on in these comics?
Dr. Wertham suddenly gave parents an easy answer. Don't think you're a bad parent. It's those damn comic books that are ruining your children. And people seized on it and jumped on it.
See, Americans were embarrassed about comics.
Stan and I never used to say we worked on comics. I said I was an illustrator. Stan said he was a writer. Never mentioned comics.
Occasionally, some people who we weren't too familiar with would come over to me and say, and what do you do? Oh, man, I didn't want to admit what I did, so I'd say something like, oh, I'm a writer, and I'd start to walk away, but he'd follow me. What do you write? I'd say, stories for children. I'd walk away again. He'd follow me. What kind of stories? At some point, I had to say comic books. At that point, he would turn around and walk away. The publishers got together and hired a psychiatrist or somebody, I think her name was Trulock, Mrs. Trulock, to head up an organization called the Comic Magazine Association of America, and they would be a self-censorship group. And they would make sure there was nothing objectionable for kids, not too sexy, not too violent, etc.
You couldn't sell a book unless it had their seal on it, approved by the Comics Code.
The imposition of the Comics Code created a blandness. It stifled creativity. And the extremes that were built into the code, if you look at them today, are almost laughable.
No comics shall explicitly present the unique details and methods of a crime. Scenes of excessive violence suggestive and salacious illustration is unacceptable.
It was an incredibly frustrating time also. I would meet somebody somewhere. Hey, you're the guy who writes Millie the Model. Gee, I read that. That's great. Never heard that. The sales got very bad, and our publisher, Martin Goodman, had to drop a lot of comic books.
And it took about 2 years when we got to the point where that's when we went belly up.
And Martin said, Stan, I'm going to Miami. I'd like you to tell the staff that we have to let him go. That was always the thing I had to do. And that was like one of the worst moments of my life. Because these weren't just artists and writers who worked for me. These were people who were like my closest friends. I mean, I knew their wives, I knew their kids, I knew all about them. And I'm sorry, we won't have any work for you for, I don't know, maybe a year or two. Oh, God, it was the worst.
I didn't get any work. There was no place I could get any work. So I got a job as a security guard for General Foods.
I thought for sure in '54 that I would never be working in comics again.
We moved up to 260 Park Avenue. Stan, he had one little room, and he was all by himself. He had no secretary, and no bullpen, no one to do any corrections.
Stan was virtually the only employee in the comics, you know.
Doing comics was like you were on the bottom rung of the creative totem pole, so to speak. Here I am, a grown man. I was in my 30s, and I'm doing juvenile things. Most of my neighbors, they were stockbrokers, they were bankers, they were businessmen, they were doctors, they were lawyers. They didn't take me seriously. What kind of reference was the fact that you had been writing comics? So I kept staying there because I had a wife and a baby, a child. I didn't know where else to go. But finally, I was ready to quit by about 1960 or 61. I had been doing it for 20 years, and I said to my wife, look, I'm sure there's something I can do. I'll try to write a novel or something. And she said, Stan, if you want to quit, why don't you first do one comic book the way you'd like to do it for a slightly older audience, write it the way you feel like writing it, get it out of your system. The worst that can happen is you'll be fired, but you want to quit anyway. When Joan finally said, why don't you do one book the way you'd like to do it, it was like a light bulb exploded over my head. I felt, well, at least I'll get it out of my system, and then I'll quit or be fired. Martin said to me, why don't you do a book with a bunch of heroes? So I figured, okay, I'll get a group of heroes, but this time I wanted to do them my way. And I wanted to write things to appeal to older people, too. If I had a superpower, there's no way I would wear a mask and not want people to know who I was. I'd want everybody to know, look at me, I can do things you can't do. I'm better than you are. And here's my name if you don't believe it.
It was right there in that moment with Fantastic Four #1 that the Marvel Age of Comics started, and that what Stan Lee has become started.
1961. Now there is a notable year. John Kennedy became president. Alan Shepard became the first American in space. The bikini became fashionable. And Marvel Comics made its debut.
I just saw these comics that were unlike anything that I'd seen before. The pages rippled with energy.
Comic book superheroes, up until 1961, were cardboard characters. They didn't really have a sense of humor. There was no texture to it. There were no subplots.
We try to write stories we would enjoy, and apparently there are enough people in the world who have the same tastes. I hate to say that. I'd like to think my taste is far better, but apparently everybody must have pretty much the same taste because the books sell pretty well.
All of a sudden, Stan's superheroes were dealing with angst, self-torment, anguish.
This was really the first time that an added dimension of personality had been brought in to the superhero. Stan was able to tap into something where you became interested in the character as opposed to the costume.
Wait a minute. They're fighting with each other. They don't particularly like each other. They don't like their powers. They think it's like a curse, not something good that happened.
One character, the Thing, who's one of the most popular ones, the first time he wore a superhero outfit in the street, he reacted in a way I've always felt a character in a book should react. Instead of taking it for granted, he said, I feel like a nut in an outfit like this. People are looking at me, you see. And we had stories where they were evicted from their headquarters because they had lost a lot of money on the stock market and they couldn't pay their rent. Things that had never happened to superheroes before.
See, another thing, I didn't see any reason for our superheroes, such as the Fantastic Four, to live in cities like Metropolis or Gotham City. I figured, hell, why can't they live in New York, you know? I knew New York, so I made it New York. I could write comfortably about New York. And when they went to the movies, why do they go to the Bijou Theater? Why do they go to the Radio City Music Hall? And when the Human Torch, who was a teenager, Johnny Storm, when he wanted a sports car, he wouldn't buy a whiz-bang V8. I got him a Chevy Corvette. So, again, I tried to make things as realistic as possible, even though these were fantasy stories.
Things exploded at Marvel so much when he was doing this in the early 60s. By the late 1960s, the distributor that owned DC basically told Marvel, you're selling so good, we're making more money off of you than the publisher we own. Publish everything you want.
We sell about 60 million copies, 60 million magazines a year. I guess that would break down to 5 million a month.
When we passed DC, I almost flipped. You know, DC was the Cadillac of the industry. I couldn't believe it. 1961 on, with the Fantastic Four, comics grew exponentially. It was absolutely a miracle.
I would say from 60 to 70, that's when I enjoyed the comic book business more than I have ever enjoyed it.
61
was a Fantastic Four.
62, he had the Hulk, Ant-Man, and Thor.
Spider-Man.
1963,
Sergeant Fury.
Iron Man, Giant Man, Doctor Strange, and X-Men. The Avengers. 64, Daredevil. And 1965,
Nick Fury.
1966,
The Silver Surfer.
It was like we were on a roll and nothing could stop us.
What makes Stan happiest? Peace and quiet. And his computer.
For the past 27 years, since we've lived here, everything I've written in here. This is where I work. It's a functional room which has all the things I need to work in. And I like it because it's comfortable. I mean, I got my copier there, my fax machine here, my computer there, and a little chair to sit on if I want to read a book. And I have my desk to write things on, and it's just the way I need it. My wife hates this room with a hatred that defies understanding, because I wouldn't let her decorate it. She's not very happy about those things up there, my little boxes with supplies. She hates all the wires behind this computer. She hates this room.
We have good Donnybrooks, nothing that's ever violent. But then I'm very bossy, and he's very bossy, and we're always looking to top each other off the charts.
One of the worst fights we ever had. I don't remember what I said or did, but it got you angry. And you remember I had that beautiful Remington noiseless portable typewriter. My mother bought it for me. I had it for years. I wrote some of my first stories on it. That's the typewriter I wrote the Fantastic Four on, and Spider-Man and the Hulk and the X-Men. You got mad at me about something I said.
Because you were a camera buff then. Probably something like, Joan, how can you stand there, you idiot? The sun's in the wrong position or something.
Well, why would that get you angry?
I have no idea.
Well, anyway, whatever I said, she lifted that typewriter up like that. My heart was in my mouth, and I kept thinking, oh, no, she won't. She wouldn't. She wouldn't. And she threw it down, and it shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The 60s was the atomic age, and people started building bomb shelters in their backyards. I remember we lived in Long Island at the time, and there were 1 or 2 people in our neighborhood who actually got construction crews, and they built these shelters, cement reinforced, and heavy doors that would seal shut above the shelter, and they stocked them with water and all kinds of canned food, and they were going to sit it out if ever any atomic bomb or missile was launched. People were really afraid they'd be either killed or burned alive or horribly disfigured, and everybody was involved in science, nuclear fission. So when I created the Hulk, I wanted to give it a scientific basis. I had always loved the movie Frankenstein, and I really thought that the monster was the good guy. He didn't want to hurt anybody. He just wanted to be left alone, but those idiots with torches kept chasing him up and down the hills and through the countryside, and he always had my sympathy. I had also always loved Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I said, what if my monster could be a guy like Dr. Jekyll, and when he becomes the monster, that's like Mr. Hyde? So I thought psychologically we could have fun with that story-wise. The 2 entities of this one person, and they both hate each other and would like to destroy each other.
The Hulk is a guy that kind of a lost soul. He's had no connection, doesn't remember where he came from, and he's basically searching for someone to like him, to be nice to him, that he's an okay guy.
Stan walked in, and in his take on superhumans, he paid way more attention to the human than the super. He made the characters real. He made them feel like people who you knew. They were your friends, they were your neighbors. And suddenly people got emotionally invested in this, and they cared about it.
And I think what Stan did was make really humanistic superheroes.
One of the things that I've learned from Stan is what's really important is not Spider-Man. It's the guy in the Spider-Man costume. It has to be about Peter Parker.
Peter Parker was supposed to be every man, or every young man, with all the conflicts and uncertainties and confusions that any young man has.
Peter Parker's your normal kid from Queens who's a bit socially awkward, has girl problems, they have money problems.
I tried to put him in the real world and give him the kind of things that regular readers could relate to. I mean, he'd have ingrown toenails, his costume would tear while he was fighting. It was very easy for me to identify with Peter Parker because all I had to do was think of a lot of things that happened when I was young. For example, I might have a big date with a girl that I really liked, and wouldn't you know, I'd have an allergy attack at that night. I'd be sneezing all over the place. Or there'd be another girl that I really wanted to make an impression on. I'd take her out to dinner, and then on the way home, I realized I didn't have enough money for a cab. And you could imagine the great impression it would make on a date if you have to take her home in a crowded subway. So it was not too hard for me to come up with things for Peter Parker. I just had to think of the things that happened to me.
Spider-Man is Stan. I absolutely feel that. All the things that Stan feels, morality, Uncle Ben, you know, when all of that is Stan's attitude towards mankind.
You see, I always felt with superheroes, why would somebody spend his whole life fighting the bad guys Why not just get married and have kids and lead a normal life? So I wanted to give Spider-Man a real motive, a real reason, and let the reader understand that he always carried this guilt feeling with him. And that was the reason for that. With great power comes great responsibility.
It's a great morality tale. Peter Parker didn't come out of the gate as a good guy. He was selfish. He was like, look, I got these powers. You know what? I'm going to go make some money. I'm going to cash out on this. And he went for that. And he made a mistake. In a very karmic way, lets somebody who should have been apprehended by him. And that person ended up killing his Uncle Ben. That was a real important lesson.
My father, he just always told me, Stan, the most important thing is to do the right thing. And I used to write, you know, if you treat other people the way you'd want to be treated, there couldn't be anything bad in the world.
So from that came the nature of the man writing Spider-Man and the whole thing.
How I came up with the idea for Spider-Man, I have said this so often at so many places that for all I know, it might even be true. I was trying to think of a new character. And obviously, one of the most critical decisions you make is what superpower does the character have? Well, we already had the strongest man in the world, someone who could fly, on and on. What was left? And then I saw a fly on the wall. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be something if I had a character who could stick to walls like an insect? So I liked that, and I said, I'm going to do that. Then I needed a name. Names are very important. So I thought of the first logical one, Insect Man. Somehow it didn't sound glamorous or dramatic. I figured, well, Fly Man? Nah, that didn't do it. Mosquito Man? I went down the list. I got to Spider. Spider-Man. I don't know why, but it sounded dramatic, frightening. I would want to read something called Spider-Man.
Who wouldn't want to be able to swing on a web and stick to walls? Are you kidding me? I'm 46. If I could do that tomorrow, I'd come in from the top of this roof into the building every day going, yeah, I'm a Spider-Man.
I've tried to call myself the co-creator of these characters. On Spider-Man, I came up with the idea. And then I first gave the strip to Jack Kirby to draw. And Jack drew the first couple of pages, and I was looking over his shoulder, and I said, wait a minute, you're still making him too glamorous looking. So I said, forget it, Jack. I'll give it to someone else. So it occurred to me to give it to Steve Ditko. And Steve brought so much to the strip. And I don't think the strip would have been as successful without Steve. I don't know what the universal conception of creator is. Steve definitely felt that he was the co-creator of Spider-Man. And that was really, after he said it, and I saw it meant a lot to him, that was fine with me. So I said, fine, I'll tell everybody you're the co-creator. That didn't quite satisfy him, so I sent him a letter. I put it in writing. To whom it may concern, this is to state that I consider Steve Ditko to be the co-creator of Spider-Man along with me. Something like that. And I sent it to him, and I said, you can show this to anybody you want to. Steve actually still lives in Manhattan, New York. And when I was in New York a few years ago, we did meet. And we did discuss doing a strip again sometime. Who knows, maybe we'll still come up with something and surprise the public with it. I would love that. When is Valentine's Day?
14th of February.
Why does nobody ever say, what is your wife going to get you for Valentine's? Why does nobody ever say that?
She's probably out shopping right now, figuring it out.
Yeah, it's a big problem.
He's the most romantic man in the world. Happy anniversary to beautiful Joni. Wanted to give you the world, but it wasn't for sale. Don't know about perfume because I'm a male. Can't buy jewelry. My pics would just be a waste. I'm a dunce about clothes, and you have plenty of those. So all I can do and all I can give you is my love. Ha! Sorry, can't go on. I adore you. To my wife.
My wife is really the greatest person in the world. She's far more talented than I am. She sings, dances, had been an actress, was a model. I mean, it's a funny story. When I first married her, she had been acting and singing and had a great career ahead of her. But in those days, guys tried to be very macho. And I said to her, when we got married, I said, no wife of mine is going to work. And she said, okay. And it was the stupidest thing I ever did. She could have been supporting me all these years.
You know, Stan's story told us, if you want to be successful and prolific, put yourself in debt. And the way to do that is to marry a wife who's a spender. And Joan Lee, he says, is responsible for half of his production because if she didn't get into so much debt, he wouldn't have had all the motivation to produce his body of work. So Stan Lee's debt has made the world richer. And Joan is responsible for that.
My daughter's not sensible and cautious, and I am not sensible and cautious. We just spend his money gleefully.
What's it like having a father who is the king of the comic books?
Well, he's, how do I say? He's unbeatable. I mean, his imagination, his creativity, and his brilliance has not made it easy for other men that I've met in many ways.
Now I'll stop twisting you on.
But,
how much did that cost? A fortune. You see this new outfit she's wearing?
No, I'm his greatest
This is
fan.
an actress he hired to come and do this.
I have to say, I'm his greatest fan.
Now I'll send you back to Central Casting, and I'll tell my daughter that everything went well.
That's a great line. Coming from you, I appreciate it. That's a great line. Of all the characters your father's created, who's your favorite?
Me.
That's a better line. Oh, really? Son of a gun. I have to lie down for a while. I didn't get this script in advance.
Her mother took care of most of the cultural life, I think. And she grew up wonderfully. She's a most beautiful woman, talented. She's a jewelry designer. She's an artist, been an actress. We're very proud of her.
We had another daughter who didn't survive, but we called her Jan, which Joan felt was the closest thing to Stan. Joan had her room all prepared. It was so beautifully decorated.
So she lived about 7 days, and she died. But we never really discussed it. It's interesting. We never really went on a great discussion about Jan. I saw her once. I just insisted that I see her. And she was small, smaller than Joan. Dark, pretty little baby. And I'll never forget, because they were so thrilled. They kept telling me, oh, she took a little water today, she took a little of this today. I was there the 8 days that she was in the incubator. And the nurse that was there just came and said, baby done died. I had my tubes tied off. They did that. And not only did my doctor tie them off, because tubes can be changed, but he cut them so they could not be ever undone. I tried to adopt, and I couldn't adopt. I couldn't adopt a Jewish baby because I'm not Jewish. I couldn't adopt from a Catholic family because I'm Episcopalian, but in that particular time, you couldn't do it. You couldn't adopt into any mixed marriage at that time.
Well, all anybody had to do was come and look at the way we lived, look at our daughter, look at my wife with our daughter, look at me. And they were investigating her and talking to her. She'd come home in tears. Well, you don't remember how angry you were when you'd come home and you said, I won't put myself through this anymore, about those interviews you had to go to.
Yes.
Have you forgotten?
That's right.
Boy, that was,
And
and how angry that made me.
How would I bring the child up?
There seems to be some quality in human nature where if everybody had the same religion and everybody lived in the same country, probably the black-haired people would hate blondes and maybe the redheads would be shunned. I don't know. It seems that some people have to have somebody else to feel superior to and a dislike.
His work was very symbolic of the era that he lived in. He really sort of took a lot of the stuff that was happening and fused it in these characters.
One thing I felt there were not enough black superheroes, so I created the Black Panther.
Stan was right there at the beginning. The Falcon, Captain America's, not sidekick, Captain America's partner. It was a whole new thing. These are amazing, amazing themes to be dealing with in comic books.
In X-Men, I guess my intention was to show that the world never fully tolerates people who are different. So here, nobody could have been more different than these 5 or 6 mutants that I had created. And actually, we showed that people feared them and then little by little began to hate them because they were different.
I think the way X-Men preaches tolerance is it comments on it quite blatantly. I mean, it's all about outcasts, and they talk about it, and they stick together, and they prevail. Although they're persecuted, they also are tolerant of their persecutors, of humans, or bad mutants. And in that way, they preach tolerance even as victims.
A lot of people, you know, feel and have grown up feeling different. That's really what the X-Men universe is about, is indifference.
Growing up, I felt very much like an outcast, although I imagine every adolescent feels that way. Perhaps a personal fantasy that what if my weaknesses or the things that make me different could be what makes me strong. And that's kind of at the heart of what X-Men is.
What makes the X-Men heroic is not so much their superpowers, but their cause and their focus, which is let's all embrace each other's individuality and learn to live with each other.
But it was a subtle underlying theme, because basically the main theme was excitement and adventure and color. And if people got the theme, fine. And if not, we still, I thought, had a good adventurous strip.
There is something that anyone can take from it. The things that these characters can do will obviously appeal to young people especially. But then there are these other themes, these more complex themes, which give substance to the work.
And as the 60s started to become the 60s, where themes of alienation and acceptance and feelings against the military-industrial complex became more and more important to a growing youth culture, he really turned everything on its head once again.
At that time, everybody was turned off with the military-industrial complex. Just for fun, I thought I'd make Iron Man a symbol of the military-industrial complex, and I'd make the readers like him.
Iron Man has dealt with a lot of different themes over the course of his long, storied career. Everything from dealing with the mixed blessing of a new, wonderful but dangerous technology. He's dealt with alcoholism as well.
Stan kept addressing the issues of the day, the hot topics, and the personal issues and angst that teenagers have.
So I decided to have a column every month where I would talk to the readers. I called it Stan's Soapbox. And I would talk about anything that occurred to me, about politics or about school.
He was including the readers in everything we did.
Over the past few years, Marvel Comics have become some of the most popular reading matter on virtually every college campus in America today.
Ladies and gentlemen, in the upcoming segment of the broadcast, we're going to be talking about comic strips, I guess.
Years ago, we realized how much influence Marvel Comics really do have on people. Our readership starts at the age of 6 and goes up, as I mentioned, to and beyond college.
I would say that's my principal objective, to just sort of elevate comics to the point where they're a more respected medium of communication, and they're not thought of as merely something for young children.
The University of California's humor magazine, The Pelican, recently called Marvel Comics The greatest revolution in literature on campus since the fold-out nude.
About once a year, we'd get a letter. Somebody would write, "Hey, I bought one of your books and there's a staple missing. I want my money back." You know, I would run through the office waving this letter. We got a fan letter!
I do a lot of lecturing on college campuses all over the country. In fact, tomorrow morning I'm going to Las Vegas, the University of Las Vegas.
I guess there's a certain irony to the fact that some of the children who had comic books taken away from them when they were 5 years old, when they were in college, when they were 20 years old or so, they were inviting me to come and speak at their college.
I've got a question to ask you.
I have an answer for you.
How did you create your new characters? Where would the ideas come from?
I just wonder how far ahead you work on these.
Well, I guess we work, you would consider it 3 months ahead.
Have you ever had an issue rejected by the Comics Code?
Oh, yeah, a few times. Usually for nonsensical reasons.
I would talk for, maybe 20 minutes or as long as it was. But then the thing I loved the best was a questions and answer period. I didn't really do it to increase their fund of knowledge, but to increase my own. Every time I would leave one of those lectures, I knew more about what interested our fans than I did before I started the lecture, and I would try to take that knowledge back to the office with me and try to put it to use. Little by little, I found I was getting more questions about the Silver Surfer than any of our other characters from the college kids. And they were saying, "Stan, were you interested in getting a character who embodied the Judeo-Christian philosophy and blah, blah, blah?" Things I hadn't even thought of.
He took this character and he sort of altered into sort of a flying flower child, you know, on a surfboard, who was constantly given to thinking about the inhumanity of man to man and talking about how love would conquer all and so forth. And this kind of stuff spoke to a lot of the youth, and I think they embraced characters like the Silver Surfer.
Marvel Comics began to take on a personality, and you began to see that there was one guy behind this whole thing.
He marketed comic books and superheroes first to his core audience, second to the college audience, convincing them that these were as mature and sophisticated as they thought they were, and then making sure the world at large knew about it.
Our characters became popular all over the world, and had gone to England and France and Poland and Belgium and Spain and Italy and Japan and China. And I began not to spend as much time in the office. I didn't see the writers as much.
You had to have Thor and Spider-Man and Fantastic Four written by other people, and these were comics that had never, well, at least Spider-Man and Fantastic Four had never been written by anybody else.
I devoted myself to just trying to bring the company into other fields, movies and television.
I had come out to California on business. I'd stay for a day, overnight, and I thought, these people don't realize that they're living in paradise. The weather, the open feeling. So I schemed, how can I move out to Los Angeles when all of Marvel is in New York? So I said to the powers that be, you know, why don't we set up our own studio out in Los Angeles? And I will even make the supreme sacrifice. I will uproot my family and myself, and we will move out there and make sure everything goes right. It's the least I can do for the company. Well, I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. You would do that for us, Stan. So they sent me out here to help set up Marvel Productions, a little animation studio. Moved out with my wife and daughter. We sold everything in New York, and we've been here ever since. Welcome to Marvel Productions near Hollywood, California. This is where we're turning many of your favorite comic book heroes into animated TV shows.
Spider friends, go for it!
Very nice, very nice. We could use that.
At the animation studio, Marvel Productions, I was the creative head of the studio. Really, I butted in on all the things they were doing, on the scripts and the artwork and the direction.
The company is currently churning out 250 half hours of animated series, as well as 3 feature-length cartoons.
I grew up with Stan, from his doing his animation, with his voice on Spider-Man and The Amazing Friends.
Hi, Spidey fans. This is Stan Lee, inviting you to the annual dance at good old ESU. But take my advice, don't get too comfortable, because we'll be knee-deep in danger before you know it.
I knew him from the cartoon.
I saw the cartoon on television, which I became obsessed with.
Thousands of people never heard of Spider-Man, hundreds of thousands, never heard of Spider-Man until they saw that animation show. So they were right. Business-wise, it was a good move.
My first stop will be the nearest TV studio.
The experiment is sufficient as it stands.
I'm not satisfied.
I don't have to satisfy you.
We did do a live-action television series of Spider-Man. There was no heart to the series. A villain would be doing something, and he'd become Spider-Man and go chase the villain and catch him and climb up a building, and that was it. And after the first few episodes, I realized it was going to go nowhere. And I called a meeting, and we had a meeting at the network. And I thought these people were sincere, and they really wanted to hear my opinions of what I thought was wrong and how the series could be improved. And I said whatever I could. No changes were made, and the show went on, and it was canceled after a few more episodes. Luckily, it didn't ruin the character for other things.
Stan put in these emotions and these flaws within each of these characters that made you want to turn the page and keep reading. And people have been doing that for decades and decades. In comic books, it hadn't been translated to film necessarily. There were some films in the 80s, in the early 90s, which were frankly not very good. Up until then, I do believe it was just that surface translation that had been done on most of the comic book films.
It's hard to explain the frustrations of, we had these great characters, and we knew how they should be portrayed, and there were people who wanted to do them, but nothing really gelled.
And fans didn't have any hope that Marvel would ever have any good movies.
Rock and roll! Get down! Get down! Hey, what's going on?
Scare you?
That was interesting. I've never done that before.
After years of lawsuits and ownership disputes, Marvel Comics and Sony have settled their differences, finally enabling the superhero Spider-Man to be fully marketed as a major motion picture failure. Now, the movie's only challenge is finding an actor worthy of the tight spandex costume, and who, as chance would have it, was also born without genitals.
Finally, one day, a fella named Avi Arad came to our studio, and Avi understood our characters.
I remember my first meeting with Stan in the Bel Air Hotel, and he said to me, everybody said they'll make movies out of this. But I think he kind of lost faith that this thing could ever go to the next level. There were false starts. Movie making is complicated, it's expensive. What worked for us is there's a whole new generation of filmmakers who really got turned on to be in the business by comics.
Geez, not yet, no. I heard you were here, and I said, I don't care what. I've got to say hello to that man. I love him.
I love you. I said you're like a father.
Sam Raimi and this guy, they made Spider-Man. It couldn't have been what it was without this guy.
I had no doubt that
those comic books would become the most powerful and exciting entertainment the world has to offer today when the technology got to such a level that it could portray that universe in a way that would work with audiences.
One of the films everybody's looking forward to this summer is X-Men. Is that in this venue?
X-Men is
basically a comic book on the screen?
It's the first Marvel character that's going to be a big budget movie.
A meeting was set up with the folks at Marvel, and Stan Lee showed up at the meeting. He was so enthusiastic, so I thought, well, I'm going to go figure out how to honor what he created and his enthusiasm.
Everything they were saying about the first X-Men was negative. And you'd read in the talkback and they go, well, it's a Marvel movie, so you know it's going to fail. And then it wasn't until the movie came out, people's opinions changed on that and launched sort of the Marvel era of films that we're in now.
The trick to the movies is when they capture the essence of what the great comics are.
And it's ironic that it took that long necessarily to realize that the emotional journey of who these characters are and what they expect, it's what you start with, it's what you stay true to.
If you told us when we were kids that the weird, nerdy stuff would one day be the biggest commercial successes, I would have never believed that.
When they realized, oh my God, this is drama, this is comedy, this is that, it became such a phenomenon that everybody was in.
Stan Lee's decision to go Hollywood has paid off. Spider-Man, the action hero.
Crawling all over 3,600 movie screens. The boss of the box office.
The most profitable movie of the year.
It's bigger than life itself when you go into a theater. And with all the special effects and all that, oh.
It's hard to describe the feeling of seeing characters that I had a hand in creating up there on the big screen, and especially up there and looking so good.
Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer opens this week. The first Fantastic Four movie grossed more than $300 million.
All the things that Stan injected into his characters in those films.
Here we go. Swing back, Mrs. Lee. Swing back a little. I created him. Wow. Hang on. I am just so
Stanley, John,
for God's sake, how are you, John?
God bless you.
Who's got a camera? Who's got a camera?
My grandmother had the candy store. I used to wait for the comics to come in every week, open them up with her, you know, and then we put them on the shelf, and I would read them all. I'd be the first guy to read them, and they were yours.
You keep seeing all your characters coming to life like this. Are you just like a kid inside just jumping up and down? You're doing it on the outside.
No, I'm like an old guy wondering how successful it's going to be and how many more of these things I can come to and talk to guys like you. This is the fun of it, you know.
Isn't it? Well,
this is the payoff.
I'm sorry, I'm too big for you now.
You're damn right you are.
Right here.
Eat your heart out, Ed Norton. You know, it's funny. It's a funny situation. You do all the work, and I get so much credit for this. But I wouldn't have it any other way.
We wouldn't be here without you.
I know. I keep writing you all the time to tell you that. I'm not upstaging you too much, am I? No. You know, I hear you have a bigger role than I do. All I say is, wow.
Oh.
I've always wanted to be an actor, and to be able to have a little part in a movie, in any movie, but especially a good movie, it's really a thrill.
Welcome back to the Baxter, Dr. Richards. Look out. Security ought to be beefed up a lot more. In a plate invitation, sir. I should be on that list.
Great, Hef.
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said. A million years ago, when I was writing these comic books, I never suspected that one day I'd be walking down a green carpet and being interviewed, and people would say, how do you feel about it? Nobody cared how I felt about anything in those days. Marvel is gearing up to do so many more. We'll have
Captain America, we'll have Thor, we'll have S.H.I.E.L.D., we'll have... It goes on and on. Ant-Man. Can you believe Ant-Man?
You created so many characters with Jack Kirby. What would he think of all of this?
Oh, he'd be thrilled. He would be thrilled. I'm so sorry that he isn't here to see it all. Jack was one of the nicest, most talented people I've ever known. When Jack Kirby died, it was almost unbelievable because there had always been a Jack Kirby, and he was always the king of the comics as far as everybody was concerned. And I couldn't imagine not having him around, not having him drawing. He was certainly one of the best artists in the business, if not the best.
Mr. Kirby, he created or co-created such classic comic book characters as the Hulk, Captain America, Thor, and many, many others.
There was nothing that Jack didn't do, couldn't do, and he never did less than his best. He was also one of the nicest, most cooperative, most helpful, most decent human beings around. It was a great loss when Jack went. It was hard because he meant so much to me, and I knew what we had lost. Marvel went bankrupt. It's hard to believe because they're so great now, but a lot of things happened.
Marvel was financially bankrupt, but the characters, the intellectual properties were not bankrupt.
At one point of the bankruptcy, one of the current heads of the company said to a group of bankers, Spider-Man alone is worth $1 billion.
And my contract was invalid, as all of them were. And I didn't want to stop working. So we got a company together. They wanted to call it Stan Lee Media, which I found very flattering.
Stan Lee Media was formed during the internet bubble, which was the craze right around 1999.
I started in comics when they were in their infancy. Now I have an opportunity to get into the internet when it is in its infancy, and it's a far bigger, more powerful field than comics ever were. These are the early days of what we're doing and what everybody is doing on the web. We're going to make these things more and more interactive, and that's the one thing they can't do in television. And we're only starting, so I think it would take it on good world.
Stan is an idea guy. Stan is a creative dynamo.
We were a fully functioning company. We had stock options. The company went public.
Before I knew it, we had a staff of more than 200 people, and we were going great guns. I never had so much fun.
Stan is the consummate creator. He has nothing to do with business or financial side. It's possible to get taken advantage of.
It was a terrible blow to me, especially people had invested in it. It had my name on it, and it was heartbreaking.
People started to get laid off, and that's where it was really hard. Everyone was sad. You know, we didn't want to go. You know, we wanted to keep working and being productive.
Hi, Anthony. This is Stan. I just wanted to tell you how bad I feel about the way things happened. I didn't expect that would happen so soon or the way it did. And, oh, man, I feel terrible about it. And I wanted to tell you it was just a pleasure working with you. You were great.
Stan Lee Media was unfortunate, but that was just a blip on the radar screen.
Even at age 84, he's still coming up with ideas for superheroes for his new company,
POW Entertainment, purveyors of wonder. For the first time now, I am able to do anything I want. If we want to do movies, television shows, DVDs, we can do them, and we are doing them.
The new characters that Stan's creating for POW still have a lot of the original emphasis and problems and sincerities and that he had when he created some of his earlier creations. But today's world, there are maybe a little bit edgier, the culture is a little different, and the difference between heroes and villains isn't as quite as clear.
We have 3 movies in development at Disney. I still am concerned with just writing the stuff and making sure that somebody's going to care about it.
Stan, you've been doing this for so long. You've been so successful. Some people wonder, why don't you retire and live permanently on exotic vacations? Why do you keep doing it?
The word retire is a dirty word. You know, most people, when they retire, they say, at last I'll have a chance to do what I've always wanted to do. But I'm doing what I've always wanted to do. I'm working with artists, with writers, with directors. I'm working on creative things. I'm having fun. I mean, don't punish me by making me retire. Now that the comics are so successful and the movies are so big, they think of it as overnight success. I want to tell you, it's the longest overnight that anybody ever could have.
Despite all his successes and recognition, Stan is really a regular guy. He truly is the guy that you recognize behind the mask of all his characters.
I've done everything I want to do. I've wanted to write, and I've written. I want to do more movies. I want to do more television, more DVDs, more mobisodes. I want to do more lecturing. I want to do more of everything I'm doing. The only problem is time. I just wish there were more time.
Things I have. I could never have them.
Well, you just bear that in mind, that they come from me.
Because you are not extravagant. The only thing
I couldn't afford to be extravagant with you.
Don't look at the camera. The only
Wait, excuse me, dear. I was not looking at the camera. I was looking this way. Don't ever direct the master. Now start again if you wish.
Now here it goes. Now let's get this straight.
Joe, you've got to realize
no way at all do you think that you are the master.
Joan.
Hold it. Me. Boss. My word. All right, come around here. Now I want to show you something else I bought, Stan.
I spent 60 years spoiling this woman.
Trying to impress me.
Always, and I never succeeded.